To welcome you back to Free Your Inner Guru. Just a little, actually, I'm going to let you say thank you before I freaking go on and on. So I'll shut it again.
I know, just like, okay, dress rehearsal, let's try it again. Take
Yeah.
two.
Our guest is Julie Min. Julie, this is your second time on Free Your Inner Guru. Welcome back. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
The last time that we spoke for Free Your Inner Guru, it was October 2017. I can't believe that time has gone by yet again. That was like almost 3 years ago. And there's been a lot happening in both of our lives and a lot of activity around a part of our life story that is shared because you and I were both present at Spiritual Warrior in October 2009. We both took workshops with James Arthur Ray and went on huge journeys of personal growth and self-development. And I'm just so grateful that you're wanting to come back and use this platform to share more of your story and just a little bit of background. Julie's first interview was that we talked a lot about, from my recollection, we talked about survivor's guilt. I think it was shortly after the Las Vegas shooting. We were both really feeling moved to express on that level and chose to do it together. And now the conversation is evolving again with the release of Wondery's Guru podcast over the summer. And it's out in its entirety now. It dropped in July and early August. And something that people won't know right away is that you sat for an interview for Guru. And so you put time into the production, and in the end, you were not featured. So this is special to be able to have you here to talk about that. And I'm curious, because we haven't talked about this piece for a long time, what did you think about the 6 or 7 episodes of Guru that you heard? What was that like for you to listen?
You know, it was, it's always a little shocking to me that the level of reaction that I have. I think that I'm further along in my healing, and then I listen to my friends talk about an event at which I was at, and then it brings me right back. And so many levels of reaction to the 7 episodes. If I take myself out of that experience in terms of my expectation of me showing up at all in the episodes, and if I just listen to it for what it is, I was really proud. I am really proud of you and Brandy for speaking, for being so brave to be willing to be so vulnerable, and to share that uncomfortable part of the journey. You know, I recognize that we all like to talk about the successes, and you know, it's like, once you've done the work, look at how fabulous we all are. But when you are in the middle of your pain, and to be asked to share that story, that's difficult. And even though it's been 10, 11 years since the actual event, to be asked to recount again one of the worst moments of all of our lives, to have been there, and for people to have died, and not even, that's not the extent of the trauma either, because so many people went to the hospital, and everybody who was there has been traumatized by it. So that reaction, it was a little bit surprising to hear the kind of storytelling. It's always the perspective of the podcaster, in this case, Matt. And these things always go in a different direction than you initially expect or hope. so, so that was interesting to witness and to kind of regroup and go, okay, it may not be what I had hoped it would be, and it's still, I think, a vital part of the storytelling. It fills in a piece that we didn't have before. And so, from that perspective, I'm happy that it's out there. And I understand why I'm not a part of it. And I'm happy that you and Brandy are as big a part of it as you are.
It's a, yeah, there's a body of work that's accumulating on this topic. And I was actually with a very close friend yesterday. We made some time to just hang out, and she had finished listening to it. And, we talked about the portrayal, and I was giving her some of my current um, opinion. And she very pointedly suggested that I listen to it again, because she disagreed with me on some key points, and so I might be listening to it again, and I felt like I probably need to. When we were in Enlighten Us in 2015 and all of 2016, we probably saw that movie together in public 4, 5, 6 times. And, so by the time, every time you watched it, you're processing something different, you're seeing something different, you're hearing something different. And we were there, like there in Sedona, and we were in the film, although, marginally so, some would say. um,
Yeah.
right? So I guess it's the same with Guru. And my what I have been saying recently, and it's shown up in the interviews with Brandy that I did, which actually, by the way, are like the most popular
Are they?
episodes
Oh,
to
that's so
date.
exciting. Oh, I'm so
And
happy.
yeah, and it was just such a pleasure, as it is right now, just to sit here and talk and be able to smile at each other, even though I'd rather like be somewhere physically in the same space. But to be able to gather, even in this tiny group of two, and reflect on it and realize, like, we're still processing and working through these things, so why wouldn't I go back and listen again? Because that first time through, I will shallowly admit, my primary concern was, do I sound like an idiot? Right?
Yeah.
That was about as refined a filter that I had on it, and just taking in the craft of it, the breadth and the depth, and every time I would learn something new, because still learning new things after 11 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's been really, really interesting. And so I probably will listen again. It's a lot of time, but a couple of people have asked me to post my thoughts online, kind of episode by episode. So maybe there's an opportunity to do that. But I learned a few things that were a little bit shocking to me. Do you recall? Did you learn anything new listening to Guru?
I'm sure I did, because every single time somebody bothers to do the research and an in-depth report about it, there are new facts that come out. At this point in time, I don't recall any specifics. Um, I think I was paying more attention to the craft of the story, because in looking at the documentary and my initial reaction to that, and then coming to appreciate the documentary for what it is and for the role that it plays in telling the story and the background, and feeling like Wondery, again, that perspective of it tells a piece of the story that hasn't been made available to the public in this way, and it tells it in a way that I think makes, I feel like you and Brandy represent we survivors really well. It's, you both are articulate, you both have insightful things to say, and I appreciate the vulnerability and the authenticity, even though it may not be the what you wanted to say, the message. I feel that the spirit of you both came through, which is why you are so relatable, which is why people are actually listening to For Your Inner Guru now, because they feel a connection to you. They feel sympathy, and that I feel is important in telling our story, is that we need to show people, hey, we're just like you. We are your small business owners. We are your next door neighbors. We are, the PTA, person, partner. We are members of the community. And we put ourselves in a position and found that 3 of our friends died. So yeah, it's still shocking now, still more information coming out now. We're still trying to figure out what it all means and how we fit that into our lives today.
Why do you think that the story is important to keep telling? Because I'm sure that, I can think of at least one person who would probably wish that we
We
not
stop
tell
talking
it.
about it. Yeah, and I understand that
Yeah.
there's a desire to move past, move beyond, let go of past pain, past trauma, especially the things that are uncomfortable to look at in our own participation of. I I think that that's a part of the healing journey, is to give yourself space and time and distance so you recognize that you are not only the trauma that you went through. And at some point, I think we as conscious human beings need to go back to our pains and go, what happened here? Why did this happen? What was my thinking, my thought process, my motivation? What led me to be there in the first place? Because quite frankly, I don't want to repeat that in my own life. I don't want ever to feel like I willingly gave away my power to somebody else.
Hmm.
And because of that, I put my life in danger in such a dramatic fashion. It was eye-opening, I think, for all of us. Again, none of us expected for people to pay the price of that journey with their lives.
Can we dig into willingly gave your power away?
Okay, yes, thank you. It willingly, as in we all have free will, free choice. And James is very well versed in psychological techniques and sales techniques, and very good at persuasion. So one of the critiques that I've heard, that you've heard, we've all heard, is, again, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just get out of the sweat lodge? Why wouldn't you say something earlier? And until you know the context, until you travel along the journey with somebody else from their perspective and see how we were led and conditioned both to that point in our journey where we thought, okay, maybe you know something that I don't. Because up to this point, I've gained all these breakthroughs. Yes, I am doing the work, but you're the one, James is the one who crafted the events and the learning and the experience of it all. So we were willing to suspend our judgment, set aside our doubts, um, set aside our own inner voice screaming at us. We're like, okay, okay, we hear you. Let's, since everything that we've tried on our own hasn't given us the results so far, perhaps this is what it takes. And um, there's a difference between giving people tools and convincing people that they need to do things your way.
Mm. I'm just letting that one drop. Um, 'Cause, it's easy to forget some of that aspect of it, even though with these productions it's kind of put back in your face. But listening to you, I'm reminded, and I've said, like, I think it's been well established that we're trusting people,
Yes.
and I don't ever want that to go away. When I start to lose my sense of trust, I'm usually not in a good frame of mind. I'm usually,
Yeah.
kind of dark and
Me too. And
quite
much
possibly
more
depressed.
cynical and much more
Yeah.
defensive. Yes.
And for me, that's been a part of the challenge of this continuing experiences is knowing that it's I think we both agree it's a story that we think needs to live in public consciousness. And
Yes.
too bad, so sad that we were there, right? Like,
Yes.
I wouldn't wish it upon anybody else, mind
My
you,
God, no.
to take
Yeah.
my place. But sometimes, and this summer I've been doing a lot of thinking about, like, holy crap, I've kind of got this placard hanging on my front that's like follower number one, and that's very challenging for me.
Yeah.
And and I have to move through that because I get stuck if I don't. So the value of having it in public consciousness, the obvious value is that we don't want anyone else to experience any of what we experienced or what Kirby, James, Liz, and Colleen
Yes.
experienced. And on day 2 of my interview, I walked out. It was weird and intense because we were kind of jumping all over the timeline, and I started to overshare an area that I asked to not be in it. So that was all cool. It didn't get in, but I needed to be reminded of why I do this. And like literally I asked them, you need to remind me, because I'm just like, why do I put myself through this? Like, it's
Yeah.
horrible. And they provided me with a recent example of somebody who had come to harm and lost their life in the aftermath of a self-help or a retreat. And and so that got my attention, and I was like, yeah, okay, we need to sit down and retell. The other thing that comes to mind is, like, I have had notes from various coaches and emerging leaders in their own right who have written to express that either seeing Enlighten Us or listening to Guru has changed the way that they do things.
Wow. That's
And
that's beautiful. Good to know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think there's silent impact,
Yes.
but it might be a while before, like, there is a more nuanced, compassionate take on this narrative that we're just not there yet. and
Yes.
and I recognize that in order to be there, we need to go through this stage where we're kind of being presented as these broken victim people.
Yes.
And that grates me to the nth degree, because I never felt broken. And I think the assumption that people who are going into self-help are broken is on one hand, it's kind of at the core of like, why would you need to do any of these tactics if you didn't think that these people were fundamentally broken and couldn't make intelligent decisions for themselves, healthy decisions? But on the other hand, I object to the extreme to being portrayed as the broken, lonely. Like, I had a very rich, adventurous life, and that piece is missing. And for all the freaking time that you hear my voice compared to, say, Brandy or you, who sat for an interview, um, it's just when you don't have it, you're relinquishing control. It's like this never-ending lesson about relinquishing control and doing the best that you can.
I'm listening to you, and I remember one of the conversations that you and I had right after you gave your interview for Wondery. And I would like to remind you, as your friend, that sometimes when we are entrepreneurs, right, we want to present the best version of ourselves. It's the marketing, it's the polish, it's the glitz, it's it's the whole package. And what I think is so great about when you give interviews is that you're not polished and you're not packaged, and you are being real, and you are being, again, and you say it like broken, as that's, there's something wrong with that. And I would say every single person on this planet has at least one part of their life where they feel broken, where they don't feel whole, they don't feel good enough in some area. So if there is something wrong with that label, there's something wrong with the entire human race, right? We are all that, in that together. So I hear that more as a judgment call rather than a compassionate view of yourself. And I would say be kinder.
Yeah, I was going to interject and say, oh, she's going to give me a psychic smackdown.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yes, to all of what you said. And one of the things that like this, going through the interviews and the associated interviews, the label victim was being hung pretty
Yes.
heavily.
Yes.
And I think that's more what I mean. Like, I'm pretty clear that, I have things to heal, and certainly did at the time, and didn't realize, I thought I was going to learn how to, well, what did I have an awareness of? Like, I knew about the core philosophy of harmonic wealth because I had been given a DVD that got all into the 5 pillars of harmonic wealth, and this idea of integrating your, I see if I can hit them all after all these years, your physical, your spiritual, your
There's
mental,
mental, relational.
relational, and something else. And but it became about energy. Like, in the grand scheme of things, it became about energy and this idea of living an integrated life. And for me, that's always been the challenge of being so compartmentalized, like
Yeah.
being business Laura and fun Laura, being, professional Laura and being Laura who drops F-bombs every few minutes. Then it's like this dichotomy that
Yeah.
is not healthy. And so even now it's hilarious because, as you're aware, I'm making some changes to how I'm operating in the world. And that came out of listening to Guru over the summer, where at the same time I'm writing a book, and I was in a big creative course, and just a whole bunch of, like, just this desire to just be me, not be this coach, not be this authority, to be, just show up as we are now. And that always seems to get better results than the practiced professional, at least in this milieu. 20 years ago in my corporate life, maybe, very different, but that's not where we are now.
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of the biggest and continuing challenges in society, but also for myself. It's like, how do you um, use the various platforms that there are in a way that is authentic and effective? And there's a time where you're learning the skills and you're learning the technical and all of this, and it's harder to be, fully authentic during those, stages, because you're thinking of every single thing.
Of course, of course.
Right? It's like
Yeah.
that beginner, that, levels of consciousness scale, where, you're not competent, you're consciously incompetent, and it. And, so we're moving through all of this together. And I think, especially in pandemic world, how much more energy do people really want to put into maintaining a facade?
Yes. Yes.
Because I think we've
That,
seen a lot of the facade drop away.
well, it's interesting that that brings up a couple of points. The facade dropping is kind of something that we went through ourselves with shaving our heads.
Good
Right.
point. Do continue.
So one of the exercises that we both went through, right, is not having any hair and figuring out if we were comfortable in our own bodies and the reaction of other people to our exterior selves, and if we could still show up without feeling embarrassed, without feeling like we have to apologize. And I think in this time of pandemic where people aren't going to the salons and getting their hair cut or dyed or anything, and you get on Zooms in pajamas, or you just put a shirt on, bottom half still comfortable. So it's, yeah, the facade is dropping away, and we are finding that we are much more comfortable when we don't have to put on any kind of pretense, when we can just be ourselves. And people respond much more to people who have the courage to be themselves openly, mistakes and all, flaws and all, without having to polish up and then present this, could be the best version, but how long did it take to become that best version? And what happens when you go home and wash your face and take off the clothes? Are you no longer your best version because the exterior changed? So values definitely are getting reevaluated, right, during this time. And I wanted to kind of go back to something you had said earlier about the victim label and the victim energy, because I think one of the reasons why we cringe so much when we get labeled that is there's something in that word that describes the lack of power. If you are a victim, somehow you are rendered powerless by a choice that you made. And that's the giving away of your own personal power to some external source, saying that they somehow know better for you than you do. And we have fought to regain our power, to create in our lives, to become more integrated. And when we're victims, it almost seems like we are less of people, less of autonomous conscious creatures, and more of the masses who just, we somehow fell under the spell of somebody charismatic, and woe is all of us, because we then suffered as a result. And part of the conscious path, part of the spiritual path, is recognizing where other people have responsibility and where we have responsibility in those choices that we've made to bring about those circumstances. And you and I have both gone the other way too far, where we take too much responsibility, where we feel like we didn't take enough in one area, now we have to compensate. And now it's like, no, but that's not yours to own. So we're still finding our way. We're still trying to find the fine line of cooperation versus like the power struggle, which is on the other side of it.
Yeah, and I think too, and I want to get into some of this with you, but you're reminding me of this, and this is one of my things, and I think it might be a lot of people's things, is where we can judge ourselves and most likely others based on the worst moments,
Yes.
like that lowest common denominator is the sum of all of our parts,
Yeah.
versus looking at the journey and seeing life as a journey, and you never really have to stay stuck in one place. And ironically, I think that's what we were both doing, and this is part of what was challenging for me, that the means to healing and learning and becoming more conscious, and the environment that I was doing it in ended up being the environment, and the means, and the mentor was the person who created the chaos.
Yes.
So the very thing that was helping us to heal and grow and move forward ended up being the thing that hurt us
Yes.
and reopened a lot of the wounds.
Yes.
Um, when you started down this path, um, were you just looking for, well, like, what were you looking for? Were you looking to grow a business? Were you looking to become more psychic? Like, what were you, I'm being a bit facetious because I know part of this answer, but in 2007 and 2008, when you went on this journey, what drew you to James Arthur Ray, and what had you continue on this path?
I that during that time in my life, I was teaching piano, and I liked my life. You know, I enjoyed being around children. I really liked my coworkers. I liked the company I was working for, the business, and that part was all working. But I felt like in my personal life I was stuck, and that
Mm.
in relationships there was an issue that I really had to dive deeper in to do the healing. I had done everything my whole life. I had dove deep into my own personal psyche to heal from childhood wounds, and I didn't know how to do anymore. So my personal history in my family, there is sexual abuse and physical abuse. And I didn't know how to help myself and forgive my father. And I felt like something in the approach of James and his perspective and his what he taught, I liked the fact that the responsibility went back on me, because that's something I could change. That's something I could work with. If all I was going to do was blame other people, I would be exactly where I was. I'd be stuck. So if I could take personal responsibility, then I had a action plan. And even though it was going to be hard, it was something that I could do. So I went to Spiritual Warrior with that intention.
So just so I can understand, what does personal responsibility in the context of childhood sexual abuse, how does that occur? Are you saying that as a child you were responsible for what happened? or is it
No,
something else?
no, it's something else. So I look at myself in from many different perspectives. I look at myself when I was growing up, obviously as a child. See myself now as a woman, and I also see myself as a soul who happens to be a woman in this lifetime. And the levels of responsibility that I put back on myself is when I was young, I didn't have the language or the wherewithal to protest what my father was doing to me. And also not understanding that the person who is supposed to protect me and who created my life, along with my mother, who brought me into this world, was the one who was abusing me and my sister. So that part, not on me, not my responsibility. All of my reactions to the abuse, my behavioral changes, how I showed up uh, in my relationships with my family members, how I showed up with in my relationships to my non-existent friends when I was growing up. You know, it's that, and my journey of trying to heal myself. Bless you. Uh, in in my personal life, and quite frankly, to be honest, when it comes to my sexual life, right? That it does a number on your psyche, makes you incredibly reactive without fully understanding where all the emotions are coming from. And until you address those issues, and I'm speaking from personal experience, witnessing myself, you cannot have a healthy relationship. And I witnessed myself choosing men who I didn't actually want to be with and wondering why. What, why? What was I doing? What was in my subconscious brain that kept on repeating this cycle? And until I fully understood myself, I knew that I was going to repeat the same actions. And so that's why I wanted to go. And that's me taking responsibility.
And you're reminding me too of some of the early things along the way of going and hearing, like, you're the common, like, look at the common denominator,
Yes.
and talking about, having past a certain point, having agency in and power to move forward and heal. I can see where that would have resonated with you.
Yes.
Yeah, because did you expect that going in? I can't remember if we've talked about it this go round, but you and I became aware of James Ray and the other teachers from The Secret and self-help at that degree because of The Secret, and then the validation of Oprah Winfrey and other press and media. Um, were you thinking going into that environment that it would be a solution for you?
I was hoping that it would be a solution. I was hoping that it would give me enough tools and knowledge to help myself. What I discovered along the journey by going to more events and by doing the exercises in person at events and talking amongst the small groups, I discovered that there were many people who had had similar issues with abuse, sexual and physical, and that they too were gaining tools and helping themselves and trying to get past it. And I felt, we're not in this to share the gory details. We are in this to do the work. If we need to share the details in order to do the work, we will absolutely do that. But we want to figure out, again, how to help ourselves, how to heal ourselves, how to get beyond it. And because other people were on their path, I felt like that was enough support, enough upholding space, if you will, that I could feel safe enough to let down my guard, enough to dive deep into my own psyche. And I knew that if I fell apart, I would be amongst people who would help me. And
Mm.
that was, to me, invaluable. That's what I wanted.
And if we leave the sweat lodge itself out of it for
Yes,
now, is that what you found?
it is. Absolutely, it is. I I still get chills when I think of the people who we've met and who we get to call our friends, because when they told their stories and when they shared their own personal experiences and how they were faring while doing the exercises and their journey to healing, I could see the transformation. Everybody could see the transformation. The to the posture, to the energy in the voice, to the light within. It was beautiful to witness. And I feel like that living example of possibility that I got to share in, seeing that journey, seeing the transformation up close, that is what allowed me to do my work. And that gave me hope when times were tough. So, despite all the trauma that came from the event, I'm grateful because I did get to receive what it is that I wanted going into the event. I just got a whole bunch more that was unexpected.
Yeah, and it's interesting because going back to Guru and the one of the red flags, and this might be really dicey territory, but I think we need to talk about it. One of the red flags that is identified by Ginny Brown, who is Kirby's mom and who also happens to be a therapist, was at these large events, people disclosing these extremely personal things.
Yes.
What I get it. I 100% get it. I get the concern. I get, my goodness, after watching the Tony Robbins movie where there's the woman who was in Children of God, and like
Yes.
that made me very uncomfortable.
Me too.
Um, so I get it. So how do we navigate, and this might be a bigger body of work, right? Like navigating the difference between, okay, this is healing and good and supported and I'm moving forward, and this is manipulative and has a darker aspect to it. Can we ever really know? Is
I
it is it about the personal experience?
I think I think it's a natural desire to, like, it's almost like putting baby bumpers on everything. Right, we want to protect ourselves from the worst possibility. We want to be safe, we want all the warning labels, we want, people to look out for our highest good at all times, and that's just not how life works here. We're distracted by our own internal lives, and oftentimes we just don't have the energy to focus on anything bigger. And I just feel like, oh, forgive me, my I kind of lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll try to provide. Um, you were saying about protecting everything and baby bumpers. Um,
And
did you want to say what you feel like the net effect of that, of trying to protect?
yes, thank you. It When we try and circumvent all the worst case scenarios, then we kind of take away the ability to organically grow. And in disclosing something that is so personal, in a public event, I think that is everyone's choice. We don't always have the wherewithal to know if it's good for somebody or if it's bad for somebody in that moment in time for them to be that open. For the most part, I have witnessed, and I think you may have witnessed, although I don't want to put words in your mouth, but at the events, I saw people transform for the good, where they had the breakthrough and they were much happier, where it actually helped them. But Colleen is a perfect example where that went completely awry and it went the other way, where by pushing somebody when they weren't ready to go to that place in their psyche, and then to not have any support that could recognize that she was in serious trouble and to be able to help her, that is a tragedy. That absolutely is a tragedy. And I don't know, other than preventing her from doing the exercise, I don't know what could have been done to stop that. Like, I don't have all the answers. I just recognize from this vantage point that some people are much more fragile. And
Mm.
so, how do we protect those personalities while allowing most people the freedom to make that choice for themselves?
Yeah, it almost, I mean, I want to go two ways with this. So let's keep me accountable to bringing us back to talking about our inner wisdom and practicing discernment, because I think that is critical here. But also, I was just having a flash of like, what could it look like if at an event, and I think we need to distinguish, there is a difference between an event where there's hundreds of people in the room and versus tens of people in the room. Spiritual
Yeah.
warrior was a lot more intimate, and
Yes.
people could be kept an eye on in the room anyways. The sweat lodge throws that theory out, but imagining a person from the stage saying, okay, we're going to do this exercise and here's a sign, here's what it's like, um, for this to be healthy for you, and if you're experiencing this and this, right, then maybe you want to go and talk to some of the people over there and have trained coaches, therapists, and so
Yeah.
forth. Like if you're having suicidal ideation, this, let's get some intervention, and just normalizing this level of a conversation. and and
Yes. Yes.
and then even you look, Julie, in the last 2 years, like standing up in front of a room and talking about things like sexual abuse, like miscarriage, like racism, like any kind of abuse, it has become the foundation of social movements,
Yes.
right? So it can't be all bad, or all unhealthy. But I also do know that every single time, especially the first number of times that I went out and told my story in public, I would have a vulnerability hangover for days,
Yeah, me too. I know exactly
and
what you mean.
yeah, and even with Guru this summer, this was 6-7 weeks of the same, and just circling the drain around shame, and reminding myself that pull yourself out of this spiral, because you can. And there were a number of weeks during July and August where I was like one phone call away from a therapist, because I was really struggling with being the one,
Yes.
beyond the first 2 episodes. It's a big load to bear energetically.
Yes.
And and given it's not like I approved it up front or anything, or knew that's what I was signing up for, um I it just is what it is.
Yes.
But I've got pretty darn good at realizing when I just need to go quiet for a while and go inside versus reach out for help. And I also understand it's about educating people to say, like, if you see me disappear off of social media, that might be a really good time to make a phone call.
Yeah.
Right? Just to check in. And I'm
Yes.
starting to talk to people about that.
Well, I think it comes to the point of self-awareness. So if you are self-aware, one hopes that you have enough knowledge of yourself to ask for help when you need it. It's the people who are so deep in their shame that it makes it difficult to articulate what it is that they need. And I think that's where that whole system, um, that way of learning where it's just push, 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 like it doesn't serve those people. Those are the people who need support and love and professional help, where they can be monitored, where they can have a little bit more hand holding when they need it in that way. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a stage that you're at in your healing. And to relate it to your story, when you are in trouble, you go dark. And when I'm in trouble, I go dark. So we don't have access to those adult parts of ourselves that take charge and put everything into action. You know, we are crumbling, and we just need help. We need time to heal. We need um, our friends to see us. And
Yeah. And empathy and compassion
yes, and there were,
versus, and I versus questions and interrogation.
and a lot of pushing. There was a lot of, if you don't do this right now, you're going to lose out on this opportunity. It's the FOMO, right? It's like you're going to miss out if you don't play full on right now. And that philosophy of push, 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 I feel is much more of a coach or drill sergeant rather than a spiritual guide.
Yeah.
A guide
There's
recognizes where you're at and what you need at any given moment.
I think looking back, I was so new on the journey, right? I didn't have anything to compare it to. It's not like I went and did anything like that before. And what sold me on moving forward was the fact that I was feeling better, that I was taking concerted, direct action towards changing my undesirable results. I mean, that'll make anybody feel better. Better results make you feel better, because we know, like, even the absence of feedback, the absence of results, if you've got any form of self-worth issues, they are going to come up without that kind of
Yes.
validation in the external world. And so I was being very validated at that time by success in my business. I hadn't gone back into the dating life until after Spiritual Warrior, but in things were just starting to shift around. Even my own relationship with my father, something serious happened. This was like, I think, middle of 2009. So I was on the journey, and I had a vastly different reaction to what it was. And it ended up being the catalyst for all kinds of healing, and was able to resolve some pretty serious issues that had been going on for decades, long before he passed away in 2014.
Which is
So,
beautiful.
it is. I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for that. And I wouldn't have that if I hadn't gone on the journey.
Yeah.
And 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 I think it's the journey. It's not the journey with James Arthur Ray. It's not the journey with, I'll name any other figure. It's not the journey with the coach, Laura Tucker. It is the journey towards self-awareness and agency. And part of that is learning from your lessons that are given to you so you don't have to repeat them.
Yes. Very much. Which is why we talk about it. right? We don't know the mistakes that we made until we are willing to sit and take a good hard look at it and face the truth.
One of the things that I'm always banging on about is that none of these productions leave room for talking about after Spiritual Warrior and after the Sweat Lodge. And so consciously, right now, I want to ask you about what what happened with you after, you know, and we know that from your reference to it earlier, you had also shaved your head,
Yes.
and then there you were back in society, in the days, weeks, months, and years afterwards. What's your healing journey been like?
I, oh my gosh, roller coaster for one. I think as is everybody else who's on that same journey. My personal journey with my hair, I actually knew of the head shaving beforehand. I wasn't supposed to, but because I had known people who were going to Spiritual Warrior, I saw them before and after the event. And because I saw them after, every single one who I saw had shaved head. So of course my question was, did you do that there? Is that part of it? And everybody was very reluctant to say anything, but they wanted to be truthful. So what I heard is, yes, this is one of the activities and we're not really supposed to talk about it, but this is, it's a challenge for you. So knowing that we were going to shave our heads, or at least have the opportunity to do so, I had time to figure out what I was going to say to all of my students, my piano students, and their parents, and to my employer, and to think, okay, what can I say? And honestly, if I didn't want to dive into the story, I stuck with, I had an opportunity to donate my hair to Locks of Love, which is where all the hair went. And that part is true. And I didn't explain what prompted all of my hair being gone, but my hair got to be donated. So most people were satisfied with that answer. Again, within passing, you can't launch into discussions in between lessons. But some parents were like, no, there's more to the story. Tell me what happened. And then I would be honest. And yeah, so I mostly got support. I actually, traveling through airports, I had some people mistaken me for a cancer survivor, and with eyes full of compassion and love, it would just say, "You look great." I'm thinking, "Thank you so much. I appreciate that." It's not exactly what you think, but I appreciate the love and the outreaching. And so that was, I was so grateful to have that. And as far as the rest of the story, I found that most people were so uncomfortable with how big the story was, is that I couldn't talk about it. It just, there, I might say one or two things and then that would be enough for them and they would quickly change the subject. So it was almost like, you want to be a part of my life, but this is too much. So we're just going to not go there at all. And what helped me to heal the most was getting on weekly calls with two other women who were at Spiritual Warrior. And we did that
Mm.
for 3 years, I think, that we managed to do it every month. And we had calls scheduled. And when we spoke with one another, we just said we are so grateful because no one else in our immediate life understands anything of what went on. And if they even know what happened to me, there's so much judgment because it's their own reaction, right? It's their emotions coming through the filter of fear and love and, like judgment and all this stuff. And not entirely helpful for our healing journey. Understandable, but it made that part of the healing very lonely.
Mm.
And when had the opportunity to do the um, the documentary, that's really when I started to feel once again, I have comrades, right? I have people who are walking this journey with me,
Mm.
side by side. We get to share, we get to commiserate, we get to, figure out how to heal ourselves and heal each other and support one another and keep going. During Since Spiritual Warrior, I have gone on sabbatical for teaching piano and teaching music. I stopped um, the month that my father died. And since then, I've been healing from that and working on my psychic business. And now, even with all the trauma and all the ups and downs and everything else, I feel like I am at the best place in my life that I've ever been. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here. And can my life get better? Oh, of course. Of course it can. There's always something. There's always things that we're working on and projects and uh, our business, right? Life goes on. So there's still wounds, and I'm the best I've ever been.
Your it feels very much like that idea of the spiritual warrior,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
irony of ironies.
Yeah.
And that's it's a Buddhist concept, first of all. So it's a lot older than um, a workshop title. It feels like you're really dedicated and determined to continue moving through and not avoiding, which is so inspiring. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking, when you were saying about your monthly calls with the two others, um, people now, if you think about it, in this pandemic and this, because what happened in Sedona was a community trauma,
Yes.
right? It was a trauma that happened to a community. There were 3 people who lost their lives and countless others affected, and there was a huge web of people also associated with it.
Yes.
And it highlights for me how important it is during times of fear, chaos, trauma, for people to have a lifeline and stay connected.
Yeah.
And stay
Absolutely.
connected, that's something that lets you be real. You know, interestingly enough, as you know, I've been beta testing a Free Your Inner Guru community since the beginning of the pandemic. And the premise has been come as you are. And boy, did that resonate at the height of it, but it continues to resonate because people who have big hearts or who are on a journey of self-awareness, the outside world is not always the friendliest place to be and to receive information, stimulation, you name it. And having a place of refuge where you can kind of take off the mask if there is a mask, or express what needs to be expressed just in conversation, not therapy, but being able to say, yeah, there's a struggle going on here, or share a victory so people can see that victories are happening.
Yeah.
It's really been a beautiful thing.
That's I remembering the James Ray community is bittersweet because you and I come from that community. We know each other because of that. And Brandy and some of our best friends, again, that deep connection to people that goes beyond similarities or commonalities in life. And that was one of the biggest heartaches is after Spiritual Warrior, that community fractured and ran off. I mean, they disappeared from one another. So because of that, I'm even more grateful to those two women. And I'd like to name Brandy as one of those two women. She and I,
Yeah.
I love her. It was such a blessing to share that part of the journey with her, to walk that path and to be open to one another. And then for us to come back together now, again, almost 11 years after the fact, still be friends and still keep in touch and still, we get to see the growth.
Yeah. And the healing and,
Yeah.
and the contrast. Do you
We're
think that, do you think that, I kind of lost my train of thought. My turn. Um, um, I'm recalling that my own healing was pretty much on pause for 4 or 5 years afterwards. And I mean, it's not like it all just started and finished in one day. There was the trial, there were the weeks in between there. I got very busy in my personal life and bringing in a marriage and a stepson and a new business. And my way of responding to it all was to be very active in the, quote unquote, real world, if we want to call it that, like the tangible world. And so I didn't realize until I did my interview for Enlighten Us that I still had so much more to do. And that's when you and Brandy came back into my life. And I was like, on one hand, I was like, what? You guys have been talking this whole time. And on the other hand, I was just so grateful for the reconnection. And also that anytime anyone from that I have even the loosest of ties to, if my phone rings and I see it's them, it's like, it's a pickup.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And I feel like there is room for the more compassionate story. And this is one of my, I think every time that we enter into one of these projects, and, I want to make sure we've mentioned, I'm sure we have, but just in case, you did sit for an extended interview for Guru and you were not used. And knowing what you've shared now, you can see in a way that adding your backstory to the narrative, it is a lot. Like, you can't do that lightly.
No.
It can't
No.
just be done as a detail.
It's a, yeah. I became very aware that my story did not fit their narrative for what they wanted to, how they wanted to inform the public of what had happened. And just like Brandy feels like an outlier, I feel like an outlier, where it's just like, well, I have so much in common with everybody who is there, and my story is different.
Yeah.
That requires a whole nother special.
I was going to say, my friend, we all feel like outliers, but I get what you mean with regards to, and this has been part of the exploration for me as I'm writing this memoir. Like, and I remember being at Spiritual Warrior before the Sweat Lodge thinking, oh my God, like, get over yourself. None of this stuff has ever happened to you. It was my first significant exposure to anyone who had been sexually abused at any age. And on one hand, it made me grateful. And on the other hand, recently I'm writing and I'm like, oh my God, this is so boring. Like it's just, and my story is so, it's so sadly normal. It is the erosion of a spirit by the everyday.
And that's what makes you so relatable, is that you represent that story that is your story. I think I'm sad when people relate to my story, and yet we've lived very different lives because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who have that commonality.
Yeah. And I remember being told, your biggest stuff is your biggest stuff to you. And I
Yes,
stand by that today, like whatever the
absolutely.
challenge is. So it's not to minimize the everyday, because I think we live in a world that is designed to erode us,
Yes.
to take our barriers down, to make us vulnerable to influence, whether it's something as, benign as which brand of potato chips to buy on the television, or which ads to click on in the death scroll, it's, or doom scrolling, like it's, it is why I think self-help, personal development has become so much more mainstream in the last 10 years. It's because it's so needed. And so whenever one of these productions comes out and it seems like it's presenting the journey as scary or bad, or as less nuanced than I would like, it makes me concerned, because I still would never want to discourage anyone from taking the journey, but I would want them to be armed with more awareness because of our story.
I think we all hope that things can be easy and that they have a fairy tale or movie ending, that kind of plot. However, life tends to be really messy. And even with all the good, there's a lot of bad, right? There's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of breaking down in order to figure out what's worth keeping. And it's not easy. In fact, I find that it's among the most difficult things that I've ever done, is to break down some internal defenses that I have, that, like my armor against the world. I do the work because I see the results in my own life. I feel the results in my own life. Like, I like myself so much better now than any other time in my life. And that took effort to, first of all, admit to myself who I was and how I was showing up, and my part in it, where I could have stayed the victim and said, oh, it's all daddy's fault. But he participated in something in my early life, and then I perpetuated it. So that's again, taking responsibility and saying, if I don't like it, I can change it. And that's where it gets exciting. When you, first of all, admit the truth, and it hurts because you're like, ouch, I am that person. I am doing what? Oh, crap. And then beyond that, then you can go, oh, if I did it, I can change it.
Yeah.
And
And I
if you can
have to say,
make it better.
right. And that's the healthy side of personal
Yes.
responsibility. And I have to, like, I smell a pattern. So I have to, just because I'm me and that's what I do. So that pattern perpetuates with the sweat lodge.
Yes.
Right. The dynamic is of that male leader of the group.
Yes.
And you, is it a similar choice? Did it occur similarly to you? Did doing the healing work with regards to your relationship with your father, did it empower you in any way to be able to either move through or forgive or deal with the dynamic of spiritual warrior?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've used psychological techniques on myself to heal through all the trauma in my life. And one of those techniques is to take myself out of my life. And it's easy to disassociate. I've already done it since childhood, right? That was one of my defense mechanisms. So to actually use it for my own good and turn it into a witness position where I can see many daughters and many fathers, and how no relationship is perfect. To look at my father with compassion, to see him as a little boy and to what happened to him, his growing up, how his parents were, and how the cycle of abuse has been present in my family. Again, some shame, but truth bomb for generations, at least a few generations. And I don't know how much farther back, because I just, there hasn't been anybody to ask. But if it was present in my parents' suffering when they were children, I'm pretty sure that it happened to their parents as well. So, sorry, I got a little sidetracked. So,
We were making the connection to doing the inner work on, your personal
thank you.
journey, and how did that impact your ability to heal from the wound of spiritual warrior?
Thank you. Thank you. So, for me, when I used these techniques to look at my father, to look at the life, also some of the tools that James taught me, and to clarify, the things that I've learned from James are not his wisdom. They're the wisdom that he accumulated and taught. And I say James because that's where I learned it. But I also recognize that he is not the owner of the wisdom, that it's out there in the world in different religions and different philosophies. So in being able to look at my father as a person, to forgive him for not knowing any better, do I still wish that he had made different choices? Of course I do. I mean, it still hurts on some level to know that the person, again, who is supposed to protect me is the one who's hurting me. And to take that relationship and then to look at James, there was good that came out of that relationship, and there was also abuse that came out of that relationship. It's same, male dynamic. My father broke my trust so early on in my life, and that sacred bond was forever changed because of his actions. I don't know if I ever gave James that consideration when I met him. I think I already had him at a distance. And what he did to me personally, I can forgive. But he also didn't kill my daughter, right? My daughter did not die at his event, nor did my son. So I don't have that to forgive. I can look at that and go, that is horrible. And at the same time, I can look at him and say, that was not his intention. For as many mistakes as he's made, it was never his intention to actually purposefully hurt anyone. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He's always wanted to help. He's just a little misguided in how he's helping. And so, yes, my relationship and my healing journey with my father definitely gave me the tools to forgive James and to look at him with compassion. Mm-hmm. Much more so than I think I would have otherwise.
there's something there to be extracted around remembering that anyone in this position of leadership, particularly, well, I was going to say particularly self-help, but you could extend it to clergy, doctor, anyone involved in any form of spiritual or body, where are we most vulnerable, right? Our bodies and our spirit.
Yeah.
And therapists, they are human too,
Yeah.
and they come with all the human foibles, and they come with, and I think that is the dynamic of why it brings me back down and reminds me of why the putting them on the pedestal and the fame that's associated with it
Yeah.
um, is so incredibly toxic, because it takes that facade and it amplifies it,
It does.
and it makes the facade the thing.
It makes the marketing, the creation of this mythic figure. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's why people resonate with people like, say, Brene Brown, where like shame and vulnerability is the topic. But now you even see right now she's being elevated to self-help guru status,
Yes.
and in a big way. And you're like, I'm like, oh, I hope this goes well. I think it
Yes.
will.
We hope she has the tools to
Yeah.
recognize what's happening, and she's human. So
Yes. And so, and not to make this about her, I'm just
yeah.
caught, I'm pulling her out as an example
Yeah.
because lo and behold, Harry and Meghan have, they're, you can just see it in the press around the world.
Yeah.
And it was the first time yesterday that I've ever seen Brene Brown, who is a psychologist, being referred to by a British, it's probably a tabloid, as self-help guru. and
Whoa.
and I was like, oh boy, that's quite
Oh
a
no.
mantle to
Yeah.
put on someone.
Yes.
And so we need to continually tell this story, and I hope that we find a way to tell this story that is able to have an impact. And I don't think the mainstream is it. I think that's kind of being exhausted, um and it will continue. But I would love to see our story told in a way that isn't shaming to the very people who could benefit most from the awareness. And I still find that there's elements of that attached to it. And that's why I'm motivated to have these conversations with you, with Brandy, with anyone who wants to come on, because to present the whole person and to humanize is, I think, the way to get to the hearts of the people who are closest to us.
And what you just said there, it my thoughts are going to our what basically your inner guru, right? Your inner wisdom, that voice inside yourself that knows what's best for you, because only you can be inside your body 24/7. So even though some outside authority might have an opinion, you still get to make that choice. And your gut, your um, instincts, your something, some voice inside of you knows what's best for you. We just have learned not to listen to it. We've turned it
Mm-hmm.
down. We've been trained to listen to outside authority, to do jobs that we don't really like that much, to live lives that we're like, why are we doing this? Why are we buying a bigger house if we don't actually want the bigger house? Do we have to buy the bigger house? Who are we trying to impress? That kind of lifestyle where we are no longer tending to our own needs. We're just kind of stuck following the flow of
Mm-hmm.
what we think we should be doing.
And it really does, it calls up that image of, and hopefully it won't be too long before I get to go on a plane again and hear, put the oxygen mask on yourself first.
Yes.
Because you've shared with me in the past that you had trepidation about going to spiritual warrior, and that, and we're aware of people who either didn't go or backed out because their intuition was telling them it wasn't going it wasn't for them. And I think if we, my version of that is quite well documented inside the Sweat Lodge.
Yes,
You had trepidation yourself.
I did. I did. The feeling of foreboding definitely was very, very strong before this event for months leading up to it. Anytime I thought about it, something didn't sit right. Um, I remember having, and this goes more to my psychic side, I have conversations with spirit or soul or my spirit guides, whatever language you are most comfortable with. But I remember hearing that the event was going to be like 9/11. I remember hearing that, being asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. And I thought, what a weird question. Why would I be asked that? And I could hear my answer in just that tone, like, no, first of all, me being very practical, I'm like, I don't have health insurance at this time, and it would be very impractical, and I don't need the drama, and no, thank you, I don't want to be sick. And I didn't understand what that meant until way later after the event, when I was looking back and trying to figure out what had happened. And I recalled the conversation and thought, oh my God, I was being given a choice for myself. I was aware of my, I guess that goes to personal responsibility of what I want to create in terms of my own experience. And the 9/11 reference is, I remember what I remember about 9/11, and this is the hopeful part, also tragic part, but when children were watching television and the two towers were on fire and people were jumping out of windows, I remember this being reported that children were pointing to the TVs and telling their parents, look at all the angels. They could see the angels coming to pick up the souls. Now you can, of course, people have explained it as, well, maybe it's because they saw the bodies falling and everything else, a more morbid point of view. From my spiritual point of view, again, this is more belief in faith. That's what gives me the most hope about that time, is that at least for the people who passed, the angels were able to come and take them away before they suffered. So hearing that spiritual warrior was going to be like a 9/11, my first reaction is there's disbelief. It's like, no, that can't happen. What are you talking about? Arguing, like, that's, what a morbid thought, how horrible, shame on me, don't think that, just go. But then to find out, okay, now I understand. There is this thing. I do remember asking after I found out that it was going to be like a 9/11, is there anything I can do to stop it? I do remember asking spirit. And then I got this answer like, no. And it's like, why? Why are you telling me this if I can't do anything about it? It's like, it's bigger than me. It is not my role to be savior and to prevent some disaster. That's not why I was being given this information. It was because something's coming. It's the ripple effects of it go throughout time, forwards and backwards, as a trauma, and we're aware that it's coming. It's big, again, bigger than us.
It's interesting that you say that, and I have to be mindful of our time, but I think this is listening to you and following along as best I can. This is an example of how psychic ability works.
Yes.
And the piecing it together is very much up to the person that it's for.
Yes.
And in its own very strange similarity, during those months and years, I was, and again, I never had any of this stuff in my life. I didn't have people like you in my life. I didn't even know you were psychic at that time, but it was definitely around, and you're engaging with people who are incredibly intelligent and sensitive and have these professional lives, and who also just happen to have other gifts. And I got a referral to a psychic, and I had a session within a couple of months before Spiritual Warrior. And this person who I didn't know him, he was somewhere in, I think, Western Canada, and he was asking me, are you traveling? Like, it comes in questions sometimes, and and it's, are you traveling a lot? Are you going here? Are you going there? And he was trying to deal with an image that he was being presented, and he described it as a MASH unit, and that he was seeing, he's like, you're okay, it's happening all around you, but it looks like you're in a war zone. Are you planning to travel overseas anytime soon? And I was like, no.
No.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not going anywhere near a war zone.
War-torn country. Yeah.
And certainly if the opportunity comes up, it sounds like maybe I should let it pass. Like, and so and he was discombobulated by it, in a sense, right? Because here you are having this reading with this nice lady from Kelowna, and and suddenly this comes in. And so there was no resolution during the session, and it wasn't until, I swear to God, over a year later that dropped for me, and I went and I found the CD and I listened to it again.
Hindsight.
It's
Like, oh.
But it's also sight, that it's other sight, right?
Yeah.
To the average person, and I will call myself at that time an average person. I wasn't aware. I thought it was all BS, and so there are, and I think this is a part of why it's become so important to me to further my own relationship with my intuition and my own abilities, but also raise awareness that there is wisdom above and beyond what you're conscious of. And it is the journey of becoming more conscious, more self-aware, so that you can, and I don't know anyone who's got it dialed in 100%, but the more you can know the difference between your own conditioning and your trauma and your wounds that need to be healed, and what is wisdom that's coming from either within you or your higher self, or that you're picking up on. We have to keep that method of sending and receiving thoughts and feelings and energy. It's about broadening it and deepening our connection to it, not hiding from it and distracting from it and negating it.
It's, you talk about conditioning, and that's exactly what our society and our lives kind of have done to us, or we've allowed to happen. This is how we live, where we set aside that own inner wisdom. And the only way we can trust ourselves is to actually trust ourselves. So we have to act on the knowledge that we're being given. And I remember when I shared that story of having this spirit conversation and being given some details, there were people, like you said, who had planned to go to spiritual warrior, who had their own feelings of, you know what, I don't think so. I really want to go, but I don't think I should go to this one. And many people backed out. Many people decided it wasn't for them. They trusted that instinct. And I got to hear those stories. People shared them with me because I shared mine. And I remember there was even one woman at Spiritual Warrior who did not go into the sweat lodge.
I have written, actually, in my memoir, I've written the scene of lining up to go in, and she was right over my shoulder. We were right in front of her, standing on one of the porches of the, not teepees, of the little cabins.
Yeah, yeah.
And she was saying, and I've written about, I've not shared, this is, and I don't want to get into too much detail here because I think I don't feel like my inner wisdom is saying just leave it. But I am 100% aware that happened.
Yes.
I'd love to track her down.
I know.
It
I
would
know.
be hard because she's European and
Yes.
I don't know where she's from, but standing right there, and I look at what were the factors that, because I was having my own feelings in my body and I was suppressing them, but there were also comforts and safety and relationships and people around me.
Yes.
That, you know, it was a really tough balance.
Yes.
And at some point there's that moment where you go, oh, and you know, and you just kind of ignore, push through, or just think, not knowing what the risk is. And I say practice small, right? Like practice small. And I'm pretty sure over the years you've said that to me 1,000 times, right? It's like practicing the discernment piece and strengthening that muscle small and doing the best you can, and know that at any moment in time everyone is doing the best that they can. Sometimes their best sucks.
Yes. Yeah, we've all had that.
Yes. And you know, so it just becomes a journey. And so this is why I get concerned or upset if I feel like our story is used to push people away from the journey.
Yeah.
Because I believe in the importance of the journey. And without exception, these past 6 months during the pandemic, the people who I've observed who are weathering the disruption and the chaos the best, they're the people, and I mean the people who are really affected. If we're talking about somebody who's, you know, not got kids at home, is going to their job every single day, and like the worst of it is that they're feeling isolated, and that could be horrible for any given person. But the people who have weathered the storm the best are the people who have done the work.
Yes.
Resiliency. And yeah, and being okay with being with yourself.
There's a difference between choosing something because it's not right for you and running away from something because you're scared. So if fear is your driving motivation, that's something for you to look at. And the reason why I say that is because I have an aversion to things having power over me because of my life and some of the choices I've made. So even if something scares me, I'm going to figure out a way how to get through my fear in order to achieve it, because that's important to me. I don't like fear controlling what I can and can't do. And that's not a person, but that's my own feeling, my own reactions to things.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about making choices, it's either you're choosing something or you're running away from something. If you choose, even if you're not choosing, but if you're consciously, this is not for me, that's a choice out of love that you do for yourself. But if you are not choosing the spiritual path because you may get hurt, it's like you may get hurt crossing the street. You could get hurt walking to the refrigerator. You could get hurt. You know, there's so many ways that life can kind of sneak in there. But it's not about that. It's how do you choose to live? What experiences do you want to have? Wouldn't you rather live a life where you create it instead of at the end of life having all those regrets of, I wish I would have. Instead of following everybody else, I wish I would have followed myself.
Yeah. Just as we move towards wrapping up, Julie, if you were to look back at this entire experience, what would be, if someone said to you, you've got like 1 or 2 minutes, here's the microphone, what would you like people to know?
You know, it's so interesting as you say that. I think of my tattoo, and if may I show you?
Sure.
So I have this tattoo. It has words. I don't know if you can see the whole thing.
It says, choose love now.
Yes. So I actually, I got that tattoo in honor of Kirby, James, and Liz and my journey. So the 3 words represent those 3 souls. And it's my reminder that me being an emotional creature, I tend to feel things very deeply. And because I spent so many years suppressing my emotions, I kind of let myself go the other way, and I dive deep into emotions. So I feel everything. I'm often cranky. I, go through everything. And every feeling is valid. Of course it is. We have this system of feedback for a reason. We are not created with emotions for the emotions to be wrong. They just inform us how our choices feel to us. So if our emotions are letting us know something isn't right, that's for us to know and us to listen to. So all of these emotions being valid, sometimes I indulge in some of the crankier ones a little bit more than I'd like, especially in writing my own life story. There's a lot of dark in there. And at the end of the day, I want to take away the best of people and my experience and what I've learned, and that is to choose love over any other emotion. If you start with the place of love, from a place of love, you can't go wrong, because that is, I am taking care of myself. I am taking care of life. Even if all you can do is take care of you, that is the best thing ever. That's good for all of your relationships if you take care of you first, because nobody else can take care of you the way you can take care of you. So that's really what I have learned, is along the journey, honor all of your feelings, honor the pain, honor your suffering, if I can say it that way, because we have to acknowledge that it's valid, that we have a right to feel that way. And we also don't want to stay there.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what you made me think of there is this, in denying our emotions, not the ones that we're picking up from other people or intuiting on others' behalf, but in honoring that, we are being fully human. And especially, one of my biggest challenges has been around suppressed emotion.
Yes.
And you know, whether that's no emotion in business, or don't cry, or, you know, just this conditioning. A lot of us have been conditioned to suppress the emotional side, and that becomes the norm. And and the path forward is actually a lot faster if you can allow them to happen and deal with them. And that's, I think, one of my big takeaways has been, and even this summer, to allow myself to feel the feels on what's happening. And now, you know, and early September, pick up and away you go, right? Moving forward, having integrated and having a new understanding of of the next phase in all of this.
Yes. I think that's really important what you just said there, that because you allowed yourself to feel the emotions while they were happening, there's no backlog. There's no, leftover you have to process. It's you are fully present in where you are now. And because you gave yourself that time and space, permission and compassion, you were able to move forward fully integrated. Yes, I had all those feelings, and everybody around me seemed to have those feelings too. And now I know what to do with them. I'm going to use them to propel me forward and to communicate with people and be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so much, yeah, I always find it funny how we make emotions the bad guy, and they really aren't. Again, they're just a feedback mechanism where our soul is trying to get our attention and say, hey, maybe make a different choice because this makes you really unhappy. This doesn't feel good. And that's all that it is. Yes, am I doing the right thing? Maybe I should reconsider and try something else.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on here, for sharing your insight, and being able to, you know, and clearly to share your story. And your backstory requires, you know, that inner strength that comes from the healing. So I want to acknowledge that, but also just to be able to throw the doors open a little bit on what, you know, what the life and thoughts of someone who has a psychic ability are. That's very generous of you, and I think it also makes it more accessible for people to understand. As you've told me for years, you know, you have the power too. It's how it's tuning in to how it occurs for you.
Yes,
And yeah, and so I really appreciate that, because it shows it's not foresight in the sense of always being sure. It is, it's being sure of the feeling, the energy, the vibe, and interpreting it for the outcomes. And that's where, you know, speaking with people like you can be so helpful, because it's another sight into a person and their energy. So if people want to connect with you after listening, where can they find you, Julie Mann?
oh, I'm kind of an elusive creature. I am available if you want to message me on Facebook. Uh, I do not have a working website, so that's not helpful. And really, that's the best way to get me.
Yeah, and yeah, you live. We occur in the online world very differently, but I will. I
Yeah.
am also a good point of contact for Julie as well.
Yes.
So thank you once again for coming on, and for just bringing the light and bringing the love. Um, it's so
Oh, thank you,
appreciated.
Laura. I love our conversations, and it has it really has been my privilege to witness you grow over the last 3.5 years or so for this podcast. And it's beautiful to see you blossom. And I'm excited to